I'm going to go over all my settings. So a few of my friends have asked me how I got the thing set up, and I've been playing around with it all weekend. A lot of help from doing my own little research all over YouTube. But everything I found seems to be from people who have much higher end hardware than I do. I'm still on relatively, I don't want to say mid-grade. My CPU is top tier, but my GPU is a 1080 Ti. It ain't no slouch, but it's a almost 5-year-old card. And I think that's more in line with what most people happen to be running right now. Not everyone has the opportunity to run a 3070, 3080, or 3090, myself included. So I took what I could, adjusted it to what I have, and I feel we should go through it together. And this will be more specific to an Nvidia setup. If you happen to have an AMD card, the rest of the settings will still apply. Obviously, the Nvidia stuff won't. But I do know that the, what do they call it? The Crimson software for AMD, they got something similar to that, but I don't really go full on in depth in the Nvidia settings anyway. So to show you what I'm talking about, let's switch over here. This is the Nvidia control panel. You get to this. Here's my desktop. Right click, Nvidia control panel. That pops up. I got the game running in the background already, so that's why it's there. But normally this is what would pop up. I only change a few settings in here. You can go super, minute into the details, adjust it here and there. But for the most part, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Nothing you're really going to notice, especially up, if you look at my mouse cursor, up in this corner, if you turn this on in game. And again, these are your settings specifically to Warzone, because that is what I play predominantly. But all the settings I did gave me about 20 to 25 FPS average, better improvement without hurting my visibility. I'm 35 years old. I have horrible eyesight. I need all the help I can get. So I can't run marshmallow graphics just to get high frame rates. So I try to find a very healthy balance, and I think it works out pretty well. So if you happen to be less challenged in the eyesight department, you can even change a little bit from there, but use my settings as a baseline. So going from this, you want to make sure the middle one's set. I believe that's default, but just make sure it is. Otherwise, these settings don't do anything. The only thing I changed in here was power management. I changed to maximum performance. And make sure G-Sync and G-Sync compatible is on. And low latency mode set to ultra. Again, if you want to go super finite into the details, you can tweak it, get 5 maybe FPS average better. Some people claim as high as 10, 15 FPS. But again, these are all adjustments for a almost 5-year-old graphics card. So most of it is not going to make much of a difference. After that, make sure your resolution matches. I've got 3 showing up here, but most people only have the 1. Your primary monitor, make sure the resolution is set correct. Make sure the refresh rate is set correct. Other than that, hop down to G-Sync. Make sure that is on, if you have it, of course, and enabled for windowed and full screen mode as well. So that way it's going to work whether you run full screen borderless, windowed, whatever, it'll work. I run full screen borderless because I'm running a dual monitor setup, so I can drag things over to what you guys see versus what I have off to the side. And then lastly, adjust video color settings, Nvidia settings, advanced, set that to full. It defaults to limited. I don't know why. maybe it's more compatibility with older and newer monitors, but if you have anything built in the last 10 years, set that to full. Adjust desktop color settings. I bumped this up to 75% vibrance. It makes the whole thing pop a little bit better. Obviously not just for Vanguard, but your entire Windows experience. It makes it stand out a little bit more vibrant. Don't go too overboard, otherwise it's just like color vomit all over your face. You don't want that. Just a little bit to give it that little extra pop. Other than that, make that go away. You want to, in your search bar, search for game, go to game mode settings, make sure game mode is on. And one last thing, go into just search for settings. You want your display settings. Go to graphics settings and make sure hardware accelerated GPU scheduling is on. This definitely helps improve older GPUs, especially kind of keep up with the times. That's it as far as Windows settings. So let's hop in right into Call of Duty settings here. I'm just going to go through it one by one. So I run a relatively low sensitivity, so I use my whole mouse pad. This thing was key. So I had my sensitivity a little too high, and I couldn't figure out what happened. And a while back, I switched from an ultra wide to a standard 16:9 monitor. I have my monitor coefficient set way too high. Most people leave it at the default 133. I had it like 238, I think, for the ultra wide. Technically, 178 is the correct split between your horizontal and your vertical. So that way your mouse movements feel exactly the same up and down and left and right if you have it set to 178 with the 16:9 monitor. If you leave it at 133, it's going to make your left or right a little slower. If you like the slower response left to right versus up and down, and you've already got that muscle memory in, you probably shouldn't change it unless you're really trying to like better your aim and improve upon it. I want it to feel exactly the same up and down, left and right, and I adjusted my mouse sensitivity from that point. My mouse sensitivity I set to 177 because I have my mouse, the DPI, set to 1600. Every mouse is a little different. Every software is different. Some you can adjust, some basic mice you can't. So you want to find your eDPI, which is literally 1600 times 1.77. That's your eDPI. And I like mine right around, what is that, 2380 something? I did the math earlier. I can't remember. But somewhere in that neighborhood, that's where I like it. That's where I feel without having to like way overextend, like the infamous meme that's going around for high and low sensitivity. Don't want that. I don't change any of my multipliers because I want that consistent muscle memory between everything. Leave that as such. I have mouse sensitivity set to relative. Instant transitioning, so there's no fake delay. I don't even know why that's a thing, but it is. I don't change that. The only thing I bumped up was air. So that way, if I'm piloting something, I'm not having to use the whole mouse pad to make a left and right sweep. So I cranked that one up just for air. Everything else is set standard. But the big thing is your mouse sensitivity and your monitor coefficient. If you've gotten used to the 133 and you don't want to change it, you want to bump the mouse sensitivity. So the equivalent would be right around 2. 2 with a 1600 DPI or 4 with an 800 DPI. The math's the same. Tap, toggle, prone, go to. So that's how you do the instant drop down. That's a big one. So you want to set prone to go to. Some people, especially those that are like super pro, they like the automatic tack sprint. I hate it. I like a little bit more control, but I still want the automatic sprint. So I have it set to automatic sprint. If I want a tack sprint, I can double tap the shift key quite quickly with my pinky. Not a big deal. Everything else is strictly based on your preference. But I would recommend turning auto deploy off so that way you can cut the shoot when you want it. The everything else here, I believe, is, oh yeah, armor plate behavior. I have that set to all. So you hit it once, it starts plating. If you get into a situation where you have to be in a firefight, all you have to do to go back to your gun is hit whatever key you have bound for cycling your guns. So I have 1 and 2 bouncing between primary and secondary weapons. They rotate over. So all I have to do is, if someone jumps through a door, I'm in the middle of plating, I bump up, hit 1 or 2, boom, my gun's out and it stops plating. So it's better to have, in my opinion anyway, and in most people's opinion, to have that set to apply all, and then cancel the animation if needed. Graphics, the one that everyone really cares about. Make sure your primary monitor is selected if you have multiple. Make sure your graphics card's selected if you have multiple. For the love of God, make sure that does not have your integrated graphics set. You're going to have a hard time. Screen refresh rate's locked because I'm in full screen borderless. Again, because I'm running dual monitors. Don't change this. Leave it at 100. It adds in post-processing that you really don't need. If you're running super low-end hardware, you might want to bump this down a little bit. But for the most part, leave it at 100. It's going to give you the most consistency. Dynamic resolution, leave that to disabled. That's if you want the game to go for a specific FPS and never change, which means your resolution is going to constantly be changing on you. Not great. VSync, disabled. Disable VSync. Custom frame rate limit. I have this set to my monitor's maximum. Some people say crank it all the way up. I don't think it really makes much of a difference, especially if you're on older hardware, because I'm never going to hit 165 until I magically find a new graphics card at an appropriate price, which doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon. I bump menu and out of focus down just so it's not wasting resources for no reason. I bumped up brightness to 55, just a little bit. Display gamma, 2.2 for a monitor. If you happen to be running a TV, 2.4. Nvidia highlights, I have disabled. I don't recommend it. It wastes resources. If you really want to record your gameplay, do it with a third-party program such as OBS. Yes, it's easy. Yes, it makes it quick, but there's so much overhead with it, it's not worth it. Nvidia Reflex Low Latency. This is a cool feature. If you have new stuff, enable plus boost. New high-end stuff anyway, enable plus boost. If you are GPU bound, old GPU, new CPU, I run enabled. I get about 10 FPS better, and frame times are way cleaner. I don't have the stuttering, way cleaner. And one thing I didn't mention is I'm running an old GPU driver. It seems to work way better with Warzone. I am running 49649. That seems to be the best driver. Numerous sources on the internet, all over Twitter, that seems to be the best one for Warzone. If that's all you play, I recommend this driver. If you play a whole variety of games, you probably should just stick with the latest driver and deal with potential issues as they come. That's the name of the game on PC. If you play a whole bunch of different games, you don't know what's going to happen. But I only play Warzone. This is like my primary game just because of the time I have allotted to me to play games. So I chose the most efficient driver that I can find for my scenario. Again, if you play multiple games, probably just stick with the latest one, which I think is 511.72 or something like that. A couple weeks old. Quality. I don't want to change any of that. Quality. Field of view. If you're on PC, 120. Put it on 120. Practice with it. Get used to it. It's going to be better for you in the long run. If you really can't, drop it down to maybe 110 at minimum. 110's like a kind of a nice little blend. But if you got the ability, ding ding, if you've got the ability, crank it to 120. That is going to be the best. Make use of it. You have a PC, do it. Field of view, affected. Keep that affected. If you set it to independent, it's going to like zoom in and kill your peripheral. Affected is going to feel more natural and still give you that, but it only affects lower zoom. So if you jump into a room, you don't want to all of a sudden blind yourself to what's going on around you. So I leave that at affected. If you're sniping, that's irrelevant to this because that is a high zoom. Camera movement, crank that all the way down. Here's the big ones. This made the most difference for me and my aging eyes. Stream quality, normal. Texture resolution, I bumped that to normal. And anisotropic, I cannot say that properly. Anisotropic, set to normal. If I set them to low, yes, you get better frame rate. I can't see anything. More frame rate doesn't help you if you can't see what you're shooting at. So I bumped those up. Particle quality made the most difference for me. I changed that to high. It cost me about 2 to 5 FPS on average. Not that much noticed in gameplay, but I can actually see what I'm shooting. Those are the three that are probably going to differ the most based upon what else you find out on the internet. So I bumped those up. If you change this to high, it doesn't make any difference. It does, but you really don't notice it. So I feel like if you leave it at normal, it's a nice little sweet spot. It doesn't hurt your FPS that much. Nothing you're going to really notice, but it actually allows you to see what you're shooting at. Tessellation, you can leave that disabled. That's prettiness, not clarity, if that makes sense. I didn't notice any difference when I turned that on. That hurts your FPS. Leave it off. On-demand texture streaming. You don't want it downloading in the background while you're gaming. It's going to hurt your gameplay. Just leave it off. Game's going to be just fine. Here's another one that differs from a lot of people. You can crank this up to filmic or standard T2X. But I found if you just do 1x, it doesn't make that much of a difference. And it seems to actually make it a little cleaner on the far draw distances on older hardware. Again, this is something you got to play around with. But on my 1080 Ti, I found this seems to give me the cleanest look at, I would say, the 150 meter range. If I do 2x, it hurts my FPS pretty substantially, and it seems to do the marshmallow effect where it takes a really long time to render in. If I do the 1x, it seems to render in a lot quicker. Depth of view disabled, disabled, disabled. Shadow map resolution set to normal. If you set it to low, it just looks... too many things hide in the shadows at that point. The shadows kind of like overtake the environment. I set it to normal, so you have a little bit of defined shadow to it, and it doesn't eat that much hardware resources up. If you set it high or extra, it's just too much. You don't need it. All you need is that defined split between shadow and object. Enable both of these so it can cache it, so it's not having to re-render it every single time. Particle lighting low. Ray tracing, if you have it, it's irrelevant to me because I don't have it anyway. So that disabled. Ambient occlusion disabled. Screen space reflection disabled. Those are the big ones. The last thing, colorblind type. This makes everything look like dead grass. Tritanopia just makes everything look like a forest fire came through. Everything's burnt orange. Deuteranopia is very colorful, and then disabled almost makes everything look grainy. So I feel like Deuteranopia should just be like the default mode, whether you're colorblind or not. I happen to be, but I'm technically Protanopia. It looks horrible. Deuteranopia looks great, makes the game look good. Other than that, everything else is personal preference. One last thing, audio. I have mine to boost low so I can hear footsteps. Crank master volume up. And voice chat. So my squad mates, I turn them down to about 225-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. That way their voice doesn't overpower what I hear. That was cranked up a little too high for a while, and in my recordings, you would hear them better than you would hear me. So I bumped that down just for cleaner aesthetics. Other than that, those are my settings. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's jump into some gameplay, shall we?